Welcome to Yoga Chat with Nikki, the podcast that explores the practice of yoga and life beyond the practice. And now for your host, Nikki Estrada.
Hi, and welcome to Yoga Chat with Nikki and Greg. I'm Nikki, this is Greg. We're back in action again. And we have a special guest, Eric Shaw, today. And our topic is yoga and religion. So, a big topic, yoga and its origins of, is it religious? Can you be of different faiths and practice yoga? Is it actually a religion itself? These are questions that have been around a long time, so we're here to talk about that. So I thought a cool way to start, and I already don't know this personally, would be to find out and speak, each of us, candidly about our own personal religious background, whatever that may be, so it's clear kind of where we're coming to the table with all of this. You want to start, Greg?
In a past life, I was Wicca.
Current life.
My mom was Catholic, my dad Jewish, so I have a strong biblical background in my religious past, and studied Buddhism at Spirit Rock for a few years, and
did you, in growing up, was your household, did you practice
both
pretty equally?
Yes.
And your parents got along with that?
They divorced. But I don't think it had
on for a while.
I don't think it had any. Well, that's a different topic. But yes, to answer that kind of pragmatically, my dad volunteered at the local church where I had First Communion. My mom volunteered at the temple where I was bar mitzvahed. So
they did pretty well with those two different faiths.
Yeah.
As common as that might seem, a Christian and Jewish family practicing both faiths, I don't think I've ever heard of it.
Really?
I mean, it's cool.
Well, it seems like usually one wins out,
yeah,
right?
usually one wins out. Yeah.
Right.
If you had an ecumenical upbringing.
They both lost.
For a while.
To Buddhism.
The combination worked for a while.
Yeah, I think for me it's really good because the New Testament and Old Testament are very chained together.
Yeah.
So I feel like I have a strong foundation in that.
In both.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, my background, really pretty much no religion. My dad grew up Catholic, and my mom, I believe Protestant, both from Texas, from the South. And they pretty much, and there was not really any religion. There was a few times as a kid where I would go with a friend to Sunday school or church or something, and when I would come home and tell my mom some of the stuff I heard, she wasn't too happy about it. Some kind of extreme things about sinning and that kind of thing, and that was it. We never went to church. I was always exposed to a lot of spirituality. Wayne Dyer and Deepak Chopra and Marianne Williamson and all those things were circulating in my home, but definitely not religious and definitely no sense of ritual. So when I discovered yoga, kind of a clean slate in terms of that spiritual piece, I didn't come with any particular faith.
But it sounds like they had self-improvement technologies that they were
big on the self-improvement. Big on the self-improvement theme. It just wasn't religious. There wasn't. There was no church. There was no formal way of practicing it. There was no formality to it.
Would you say they had like a faith in psychology, modern psychology?
Yeah, there was a sense of faith. I think my dad probably did too, but he didn't talk about it a lot, and it certainly didn't come out in any very clear way of, let's talk about Catholicism or anything like that. So the spiritual piece was there. Just the kind of the practical or the...
But it manifested as an interest in
for me,
self-improvement
big time
philosophy.
Yeah, that foundation for myself was laid very deeply from my mom, Yeah. So tell us about your...
That's really powerful to have that. I had some of that too. My mom was kind of a Jungian. She was big on the psychology of Jung, but she was a minister, and my father was also a minister, and my father's father was a minister, and all the way back down the line. So, and my mother's parents were also strongly religious. So
And what faith was it?
I was raised in the Methodist Church, and they're kind of middle of the road, don't really talk about their religion much. They just kind of do it. My family was much more political than they were religious, I say. I mean, like, we had many more discussions about politics around the table than we did about religion. Mm-hmm. But they were very good people, and they never forced religion on me. In fact, when I was 10 years old, me and my older brother got a paper route. Actually, it was my brother's paper route. I was helping him out on it. So we were up at 4 a.m. on Sunday mornings. We stopped going to church. I was 10 or 11 years old. I just stopped going to church. My parents never said boo. So, it was a strongly religious upbringing, I think, in that they were religious and they said prayers around the table. And you have to remember, I mean, most people, I don't know, times have shifted very much since from when I was a child. Mm-hmm. Liberal Christianity was very much at the forefront when I was a young man. You know, people like these names might not mean anything to your viewers, but the Berrigan brothers or Martin Luther King. Everybody knows Martin Luther King, but liberal Christianity was at the forefront in America before 1980, before the rise of the Back to Values movement. Mm-hmm. So that was my heritage, you know, and so...
It sounds like they led by example, not really by trying to enforce anything.
Yeah, and that's a lot of people's unfortunate experiences. They've grown up in forms of Christianity which are more aggressive or evangelical and kind of not so friendly by it.
Yeah.
That's not my upbringing. My upbringing was warm and friendly. I went, you know, even though I stopped going to church, for the most part,
You were still a part of the community?
Yeah, of course. And I was proud of my parents, extremely proud, and their friends were ministers. So I was in that community, and I went to church camp, and those experiences for me were massive. You know, they affected me hugely to be in nature and to have those intimate experiences. So
that sounds like
I had a very positive Christian upbringing, which I know is not often talked about.
No. Well, what spurred my interest in talking about this today is seeing an article. I came across it on Facebook, and it was about, you know, why a Christian should not practice yoga. And so when I saw the headline, it was clear what the topic was, and I thought, this is probably going to be an extreme evangelical argument, and they probably don't know anything about yoga. But when I read the article, I was quite surprised that the author was very well versed in yoga and knew very much what he was talking about and understood the history and you know, even talked quite a bit about the postures specifically. And by the end of the article, his argument was, black and white, if you are a Christian, it says that you are not to worship false idols, and by practicing any form of yoga, you are inherently going against your own religion. And whether it feels good and your back is healed and you feel better and you feel any of these things, it does not matter. You are going to hell. You cannot practice yoga. You cannot practice yoga. And that goes against really kind of the common discourse out there in America for the last 100 years at least, right, about yoga, is that yoga is a science, yoga is embracing of any religion, and you can be of any faith and practice yoga. So what do you think about that, Eric? So if you look at the history, let me ask you this. If you look at the history of yoga, and his argument was basically that it's akin to Hinduism. So we know that as things progressed through the thousands of years, yes, yoga has many origins and connections and overlap and intertwinings with Hinduism. Is yoga the equivalent of Hinduism?
Before you answer that, if you don't mind, you're chosen for a reason, I'm believing.
Yes.
And I'm wondering about your background, like I've learned about your childhoods and that, so have you studied yoga and sort of the academics of the practice?
Yeah, I guess that's why I'm here.
Right, that's what...
We forgot to say that.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
I mean, just to kind of complete the cycle of my Christian upbringing, because it kind of shadows into my academic experience. like I say, I became a young man in the 1980s. So I grew up in a very different religious atmosphere than the one that I was born in 1961. So almost immediately when I turned 20, when I became a young adult, the whole Reagan years hit, and there was all this Bible banging and criticism of art, and I was an artist at the time. Spent a huge amount of my life invested in that. So that, I've just realized this recently, that part of the reason I went to seminary, I felt a call to be in the pulpit. I had that traditional experience that everybody talks about. I really felt that very clearly. I went to seminary to explore that, and partly I went to seminary to explore that, but I also went there to understand what the Bible was about, because in the public discourse, people were saying, the Bible says this, the Bible says that, this is wrong, and I'm a person that really wants to know. I really want to understand everything at the intellectual level. So I wanted to figure out whether they were right, and so I did a master's in religious studies. I didn't do a theological degree. I didn't go into the ministry out of that experience, but I did study the Christian tradition deeply, and I understood it deeply. So I felt like I freed myself from the oppression or the ideas that were circulating in my culture. Then in 2000, I started doing Hatha Yoga, and in 2004, I was working as an adjunct professor, and I decided I wanted to get a PhD. I came to the California Institute of Integral Studies here in San Francisco and began a PhD program. Spent 7 years in that program, studied Sanskrit for 2 years, studied the history and the philosophy and the texts, and dropped out after 7 years. So I did not finish my PhD. They threw a master's degree at me as I walked out the door. So, and I did another master's in education. So I did 3 master's degrees, and since I started this study of the yoga tradition formally in 2004 at the doctoral level, and I really did learn that doctoral level study was much higher than master's level study. I've continued that. So in my free time, I'm reading books and doing pretty much what I was doing when I was working on a dissertation, but it's in a different realm. I'm a wild, feral scholar out in the world.
And is the prominence right now in Hinduism and yoga as a practice?
Oh, in my own life?
Yeah, right now in your studying, and
Yeah, I mean, that's what I get excited about, is studying the roots of yoga and even the modern tradition. I mean, when I was in my program, that was my real excitement. What's the modern tradition? How did it arrive in the West? How did it develop in the West? But the previous study is also something I'm super excited about, and always reading on that as well. And but as far as like my orientation, my spiritual orientation, I kind of feel like, if you feel like you're Jewish and Christian, I feel like I'm Christian and Hindu. Yeah. I mean, I feel it's a little pretentious to say I'm Hindu, because I'm a yoga practitioner. I have kind of a devotional relationship. I wasn't born in India. I'm not Indian, but that's how I think of myself.
So this is why...
If you'll forgive me, if you'll permit me.
This is why Eric is here, because we knew he would be a really good person to talk about all of this. I did not know that you grew up in such a strong and positive religious background. I just knew that you had a lot of study time in yoga history, philosophy, and that you would have an intellectual offering. So that's even more interesting and cool to hear about that. But you told me you were deeply religious, but I didn't know that when I asked you to have this conversation. So, is yoga and Hinduism one and the same?
Well, I've thought a lot about this, and the thing is that question comes from a certain context. And I think to answer this question in a way that is respectful to the true reality of the situation, we have to pull that apart a lot.
Okay.
Just like you said, yoga is a technology.
Right.
And it is a technology, however, it is a philosophy and technology, and even philosophy is a funny word, because from the Hindu tradition we use this word darshana. It's a worldview. It's deeper than just a philosophy of life.
Yes.
It's actually a lens from which to see life so that you can progress through it towards moksha, towards liberation. So yoga, of course, comes from the Hindu context. And when we have this challenge here in the secular modern world around asking whether something is religion, it's kind of, there's an implicit threat in that, oh, it's a cult, oh, it's a sect, it's going to draw us in, it's going to brand me, it's going to make me something I don't want to be, it's going to put me into a certain tribe. And what I want to do to answer that question, I feel like faithfully or honest to the circumstances, is take apart this whole idea of religion. Religion, what is religion? And actually, it's almost a yogic term, but we won't go there. But to reframe even our personal experience, non-religion or secularity has only existed for about 200 years. Before the Enlightenment in the West, there was no such thing as a secular experience. Every experience was suffused with some relationship to the divine. In the West, of course, it was systematized through Christianity. In the Indian subcontinent, you had Muslims, and you had animistic cults, and you had mainline Hinduism, which is the Sanskrit culture that goes back to the Vedas, and people were living their lives with celebrations and worship activities and personal puja and yoga experiences that were all threaded into a larger context of divine relationship, which had certain gods, which had certain philosophies, darshanas, which had certain gurus, and we call all of that religion. But religion is just, from my perspective, and this is, of course, I'm a modern person, it's just technology. And whether or not you want to pick up that technology and you want to transform yourself at a deeper level, at a subtle level, if you want to start to work with your subtle energy, so that, I mean, my frame is basically this, the understanding of the Hindu worldview, and I, as I say, I've studied the Western tradition. I feel like even the Western tradition can be subsumed within the Buddhist Hindu framework. That framework is, if you permit me, larger and more intelligent and more precise. It doesn't discount the power of something like Christianity or Judaism, but I feel like, and I know this, I'm stepping into problematic waters here, I feel like Hinduism can explain Christianity, but Christianity can't explain Hinduism. Hinduism is a larger field, a larger investment, but there are also, of course, powerful things to say about the Christian message. So we have this problem with calling something religion. The word religion is kind of it's a scary word in modern secular culture, but really religion is just a systematized approach to transformation.
So, okay, so let me ask you this. As someone who's not very experienced or even studied in Christianity or Catholicism or honestly, any religion, totally lost my train of thought.
As someone who's not studied in Christianity, he's talking about religion as dangerous, as in the secular culture scene as a threat. It threatens
our secular identity. It threatens our sense of freedom. It threatens, and frankly, at the end of the day, and I know I'm going to get in trouble for saying this too, it threatens our ego. Because the ego is confronted by any religious system, by any system of self-transformation.
Okay, this was what I wanted to ask you. So from the yoga perspective, and as you're describing this greater system of Hinduism, and that it, I agree, could explain Christianity in a way that Christianity can't explain Hinduism. If the big picture in yoga and or Hinduism is personal transformation and or liberation, is that the goal of Christianity? Oh
yes, of course it is. We don't allow within the Christian framework for individuals to attain the level of enlightenment that we attribute to Jesus. We do have saints, but the Hindu tradition is much more open. It says every human organism has the capacity to evolve itself to the highest level. Christianity puts a cap on it. There's a glass ceiling, right?
I disagree. My understanding of Christianity is the attainment of that eternal was so beyond the human comprehension and physical ability to physicalize that Christ came and made the completed it, and in completing it laid the path for all to go.
So I mean, you can lens it from that direction. Did Jesus come from above down? Is he really the Son of God? Is he a special avatar of the divine and therefore unique? Or was he a man or a woman just like us, who was born with the same subtle body and psychological and somatic capacities, and he evolved to that point, and then a myth grew up about where he actually came from. And when I use the word myth, I don't use it in a negative term. I use it in terms of like story, because in meaning making, actually.
Right. So I see it as one and the same, and that's the duality, the dichotomy, that we are eternal, and we are in a physical place that is limited. It's finite. We have finite lives. So how do we live eternally? And that's the conundrum, and that's what I think all religion and mythology and storytelling is kind of the foundation of it is, you are eternal, and here's sort of the window
to experience that. But does Christianity offer us, in the way that yoga does, tools, a path, a science, a way of experiencing that?
Certainly it does. Oh, of course it does. I mean, its very substance is that.
So, is there conflict then for someone who considers themselves a very devout Christian and wants to follow that particular path in practicing yoga?
I think there's a number of ways you can answer that question. First of all, I want to classify Christianity. I want to tell you that it's a bhakti religion. It is a relation of devotion. It holds Christ as the great avatar, or the great guru, or the great Messiah, the anointed one, whatever, and then you develop a personal relationship with Christ. And we can talk a lot about the ways that Christ is working in the world. Christ is an extremely powerful source of enlightenment. So it's a very extreme path. One thing that Pattabhi Jois was fond of saying in his questioning about Krishnamacharya was, he said, one guru is life, two gurus is death. So that's one way we might look at it. There is definitely this sphere of intolerance in the Christian tradition, in the more orthodox, the more evangelical tradition, that everything that is not Christian is anti-Christian. And the way that I can see that sympathetically is that they have an understanding of the vibration, the energy of their particular guru's anointment, who is Jesus. And anything outside of that coloring, that rasa, that taste, is anathema to them.
Well, that was very much, the tone of the argument in the article was, when you do a sun salutation, you are bowing to Savitor. You are saluting the sun god, and in that's not Jesus, or that's not.
You need not. I mean, who's to stop you from doing a sun salutation to Jesus?
Well, that my feeling was.
So that was the second part of my response is, any technology can be framed with a certain bhakti experience, with a certain relationship devotion. You could do all of the yoga practices, not looking at the camera, I'm going to look at the camera. You could do all of the yoga experiences with a devotional attitude towards Jesus, just as in the Bhagavad Gita it tells us that you should do all of your dutiful experiences, your karmic experience as a householder, with a devotional attitude towards Krishna. So it's not about the activity, and that's where I would deeply disagree with your essayist, though I haven't read his essay.
Right.
There's nothing Hindu about a certain movement of the body. There's something arguably culturally Hindu about worshiping the sun a certain way with certain mantras, but that need not preclude the use of sun salutation in another context. There's such thing as Christian yoga, and it's definitely Christian. What's to stop it from being Christian? It's held within the guruship of Jesus Christ.
Well, isn't it so ultimately, and this is what was going through my mind as I completed the article, well, gosh, just because as a kid I went to a few services and sat there and observed and you could say participated, in my heart, was I Christian? No, I was simply there observing. So in the same vein, if somebody's on their yoga mat practicing a sun salutation, if in your heart it's devoted to Ganesh, then, that's very different, right? then, as you're saying, in your heart there's a devotional quality to Jesus or whatever your God might be. Isn't it really the internal, energetic, mental, emotional attitude that makes something what it is?
I think we know that.
Yeah. So you need to write a response.
I think that's our experience. Yeah.
Yeah. So is there a time, can we look back at history and yoga and the development of the different systems and when things shifted and branched off? I mean, I'm pretty well aware of the origins of yoga here in the last 100 or 150 years. Is there a point at which it very clearly, in some ways, separated from the bigger picture of Hinduism? Can you point to a certain time frame or delineation?
You both, and you both may know the answer. Is yoga a practice that came out of Hinduism specifically?
He could answer it better, but it certainly came from the Vedas.
Well, I mean, there's a lot you could say about that question too. If you really want to get to the heart of the matter, yoga is encoded in our biological system.
Okay, yeah. Now that's the.
And I'm not saying that in a prosaic way.
Right.
I'm saying in the arising of Kundalini, there are spontaneous breath experiences that happen. There are spontaneous ululations, vocalizations that happen. There are spontaneous contortions that the body takes on. So it can be posited, and somebody's going to do this research someday. I would love to do this research someday. That there is a certain vocabulary of yoga poses which are encoded in the human system, which erupt in kriyas in the human system when this powerful energy of Kundalini arises. So if we take that context, which is a really cool context, then we completely take yoga out of any cultural context.
And it's innately human.
Right.
But yoga, as it was codified, systematized in the biggest way, we do have yogas in the Chinese tradition. We do have what appears to be yogas in like the Mayan tradition. From we look at their sculptures, they look like they've got people in yoga poses. We see postural systems in a lot of traditions in African culture and in ancient European culture. It appears. I mean, we have these little clues that are around. But as we know, it's India that did the work. It's India that spent century after century after century exploring the approaches to transcendence and codified this practice we call Hatha Yoga, the yoga of the body. It may have showed up as a spontaneous energetic experience in a number of human bodies that were observed and then systematized. We don't have any specific record of that, but it seems hard to imagine that wasn't what happened. But in the Middle Ages of India, we get texts which start to describe bodily yogas in very specific ways, and now scholars are finding that information even farther back. This is the tradition we all know that we're drawing from. It came here with Swami Vivekananda in 1893, and successive gurus elaborated the tradition. We had a Hatha Yoga Renaissance mostly in the 1930s, but even before that in India, where it became a more athletic, a much more secular practice. And then those practices were exported to America. So it's gone through these reductionist phases, but that even happened in India before it came west. It's been shorn of its sectarian taste, and it was done intentionally. Swami Vivekananda intentionally gave it to Americans as a philosophy because he knew that they would be threatened if he gave it with stories of Krishna. To certain people that could hear that and not be prejudiced, he shared those stories, but he was a savvy cat. He knew his audience. He was not going to make the error of confronting their sensibilities. So he trued it in a way that was actually very consistent with the philosophical atmosphere in America at the time, which is the upbringing you're talking about, the self-improvement strategies, which arose in the late 1880s.
I'm also thinking of Yogananda, and didn't he very much also frame it in a way that would be digestible for the American population when he came?
Yeah, he did by actively including Christ.
Yeah.
I mean, actively. You put him right up on the altar.
Yes.
And and that may have been a strategy, or that may have been his. I think it was an exercise of respect for the people he was working with.
But also common language,
I think he also respected the power of Christ. I mean, the power of Christ arguably is unmatched in human history as an avatar. He's the greatest avatar who's ever come to Earth. I mean, I know that itself will also get me in trouble, but the power of Christ's message is so pervasive,
well,
historically.
And his accomplishments, right? Do we know of any other? Well, yeah, there are lesser known yogis in India.
One thing that a Swami said of Christ that is I've been really working with lately in reflection is that the power of Christ's activity was that he took the karma of the entire world.
And transformed it.
And he is still transforming it. And I think that's a really interesting frame, a really interesting way to look at Christ's work in the world from this deeper understanding of the way the world probably works in terms of karma, the cosmos, the unfolding of the cosmos, and our individual becoming.
Course in Miracles had that simple statement that for me just cuts to the chase. And it's God is love, everything that's real is of God, and everything that isn't of God doesn't exist. Therein is the peace of God. So everything that we feel we need to protect or feel a threat, an energetical threat in, is our own, what we would probably say is ego. It's a mistake of knowledge, because really that what is needs no protection.
That's a wonderful statement. It's a beautiful statement. I honor that. You're right on.
All right, we're done.
That's true. Yeah.
So it's when, like, I hear from you a lot of like these words, religion, Jesus, God. We humans have imbued them with elements that we see as threatening, which really have nothing to do with what they are.
Yeah. I mean, I think the threat, like you say, is to the ego. I mean, what do I care what the Christians think who are not like me? What do I care what the Muslims think that are not like me? I mean, why would I get into an argument with a whole cultural movement unless somehow it was like triggering something that's incomplete in me? So, I mean, that would be my word to people who are upset about these discussions, is that why are we being triggered? What is it about the experience that I can perhaps explore to allow me to open my heart? And that's a real challenge, I think, in these cultural and political conversations, because there's these mutual triggers that go on, and we have common styles of having these conversations, and we point out each one another's weaknesses, and we've got our argumentative strategies, and I think it's just really fascinating stuff this is all just fascinating stuff to talk to, because at the end of the day, like you say, it all points to the divine. And in being open to these discussions, we open ourselves to the divine.
I also thought it was interesting that you talked of religion as a technology, because I've been listening to Penn Jillette a lot lately, and he's a diehard atheist. And also very intelligent, and he ends his podcast with "Preach Love." And just the past couple of days, really, I've had a deeper sense of religion and science being one and the same. That there's a semantics that has created conflict, but really it's the seeking of truth. And there's potentially a train of thought that science is physical and needs to be proven. However, then you get into quantum physics and psychology and other trains, academics of science that are ethereal. And I think that's the aspect of spirituality and religion. We have emotions, we have imagination. And how do what is the place of these in our reality?
Yeah, and I would agree with you that science has a certain facility with a certain range of instrumentation. It can measure a certain level of reality at a certain level of grossness. And when we get into quantum physics, we're getting into very, very great subtlety. But the subtlety of chitta, of mental energy, is so much more subtle. You can measure its manifestations through blood movements in the brain, and they're starting to do that, and they're starting to affirm the conclusions of meditators. And there are crude approaches to actually measuring prana, to measuring life force, chitta. But until we can do that, and I'm not saying someday we won't be able to, we probably will be able to if we put our attention there, we can do anything we want to do, then we're going to have empirical evidence for what we have learned from the yoga traditions. But at this point, there's a divide simply because of the limitedness of the instruments we've developed, and because people have marked out certain fields of dogmatism. A lot of scientists are extremely uncomfortable with any talk about something that seems to violate the current level of understanding of physics. But the thing that is so lovely to me is that I'm a rational person. That's part of the reason I broke out of my tradition, is the Christian tradition didn't explain things. And even the Western philosophical tradition didn't explain things adequately. It took me engaging with the Eastern traditions to find a seamless relationship between what I knew from empirical science, what I knew from the experiences of my own heart, and what was being suggested for the possibilities of my personal growth, other people's personal growth, that points to the highest level in the Hindu tradition, to enlightenment. How is that all seamless? Yeah. In the Hindu tradition, it's seamless. There's no argument with empirical science. So that, like you say, that's a red herring. There's only a gap in our understanding, but there's no contradiction. There's nothing that Hinduism suggests that contradicts what's understood in modern physics. It's just more subtle.
It's ahead of modern, way ahead of modern physics.
I would say it's ahead of it. Partly it's ahead of it.
It's already explained it, right?
Yeah. Not in immense detail.
No, I mean, not in
but it's focusing in more critical questions, because at the end of the day, the structure of an atom really doesn't matter to me, but whether or not I can learn to be a good person is deeply important to me. And those are more critical questions. And so that's where Hinduism began. It began with questions of consciousness. And if you begin with the questions of consciousness, you've set yourself up to explore every potential corner of reality.
Okay, and it feels like we got way out here, and I can hear my wife. She says, yes, and sometimes you gotta chop wood and fetch water. And there's an element bringing it back to us as human beings in bodies, living together, and the very practical, as we know, intimate relationships, parent-child, lovers, etc., very volatile, often, usually. And it seems like there's an element of the closer you get with someone, the harder, the more challenging the challenges are. Does that seem real to you?
Well, one thing that makes me think of is, I grew up exposed to all of this, what did you call it? Not personal growth, but
self-transformation.
Self-transformation, but in a modern way, right? Deepak Chopra, Wayne Dyer, Marianne Williamson. My mom did EST. I don't know if you guys remember EST back in the day. Yeah. So there were these big forward ideas that were very positive and pretty cool.
Yeah.
But from my perspective, there wasn't a way of daily practicing and there wasn't a practical way to integrate that. It was kind of all up here, unless you could afford to go to one of these, concentrated weeks, and then you got some tools, but there wasn't and yoga, to me, is how we do it. It's how we integrate. It's an actual practical daily way of walking that spiritual path, of coming back to the energetics, of coming back to the devotional, of coming back to, how do I become a better person? How do I become a better person? I mean, really, if we're not evolving in a practical day-to-day, I'm confronted with these challenges with the people around me. If I'm not getting better at how I deal with that, then what good is religion, or what good is yoga?
What good is science?
What good is science? What good is, any of the modern technology that we have, right? So for me, again, not coming at it from a religious perspective, not having had much religious experience, yoga is the practical day-to-day tools of slowly making that happen, of slowly unfolding that.
Would you say that is the development of religion? Religion is created by daily practices that someone finds to better themselves, and then someone goes, hey, you seem to be doing all right, what are you doing? And over the years, it creates religion?
Religion is the social expression of a personal desire. And there's nothing wrong with doing it with a group of people. I think it's more powerful if you have something daily and you do it, you internalize it. It's something you do your own. It's something maybe even that you do in secret. I think that's really necessary for any great personal growth. But what we call religion and institutional religion is just the affiliation with others in that process.
So with that definition, if you're a painter and you go weekly to a group of painters, that would be religion.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you want to call it religion. That's kind of a cultural label we tend to put on something specific. I just call it a group of artists getting together.
But the religion
but the model is the same, right?
But it has to include God.
You're trying to improve something on your own, and so you need the company of others for the information they have, for their support, for critical responses. Oh, you're kind of blowing it. That painting is not working. No, I wouldn't do that meditative technique. I don't like the effects. Look at your face. It's good to have the feedback of others. Corrective.
But to call it a religion, don't you need to have at least a spiritual or God piece in there?
Yeah, definitely the technical part of it. But there are people who take aesthetic practices their religion. There are people who take science as their religion, so to speak.
Buddhism, there's no God entity in Buddhism. There's a sense of nirvana.
Yeah, and usually when we use the word religion, it's something we usually slap on something that has basically two characteristics. It's about transcendence primarily, and it's bhakti. It has a devotional relationship to an avatar, to a guru, to a messiah, and or gods. That's what we usually think of when we say religion.
So the bhakti practice of Buddhism would be, the avatar would be Buddha?
Well, in true Buddhism, there isn't an avatar relationship in that regard. There's not a bhakti tradition. In Mahayana Buddhism, we start to get that. We start to get practices which are on their surface devotional, though even at that level, you're supposed to be bringing the energy of that bodhisattva into you, however you visualize it. So it's all yourself anyway. But definitely with the common people, it rose up as a bhakti religion because people are comfortable with bhakti religions. They want to express their heart, they want to be in their emotions. So Buddhism couldn't keep it out.
But I even, so much of what I hear you say, I quickly seem to be able to transform it. Like my Christian background, I went to Bible study for a while in college. And an element of it was you're studying this passage, you're going to come together in a group, and there was the piece of the Holy Spirit speaking to you. And for me, that Holy Spirit piece is just what you said. It is the voice in me speaking to me of what I'm reading.
That works. That's a great formula. Go with that one.
Now, is there an element in that where, like you, I think for instance, the inner struggle in me is there's an element of, there it is, and in that, there it is, there's the fight, like, fuck that, there's like the duality of, with my enthusiasm of something comes my undermining it. And to bring it back to yoga, since this is Yoga Chat, for instance, for about a year now, my yoga practice has been hell. Like, I hate it. I don't like
A lot of resistance.
I don't like doing yoga. And I wonder, why am I doing this if this is my experience? There's an element of faith. And I know that after a practice, I'm in a better space. That's my experience.
Okay, Greg.
So what does that have to do with it all? Like, again, in the big picture, there's an element of faith. And I think in all faiths, being another term of religion or spiritual practice, there's the myth, the story of the desert, the challenge of the desert. I was just talking with you. And the faith that in enduring this hell, there is the place we want to be on the other end of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess there's some dry spells sometimes. It's true. Yeah, and faith is, Estrada, faith. It's good to have faith. Good to know, believe that something is possible, to have a glimmer of it, so that when your practice does get dry or when it does get painful, that you keep going because, you had that feeling once. Or you trust the testimony of the texts. And so, I know this guy had the desert experience too, Jesus was out there with the devil for 40 days, he had a problem as well. The Buddha also sat for his 40 days. They had their tough times. I'm just going through a tough time. They did it, I can do it. Yeah, faiths, these religious traditions gives us stories which envelop us, which support us, which hold kind of the crucible of practice strong, because they give us navigation points with other people in the Sangha, in the congregation, in our wider society, who've gone before us. So the social side of it is big. It's huge.
Can keep you on path, I think.
In both your experience, do you think yoga is such a science that without faith and belief in it, if one practices it over a period of time, the positive aspects, that the transformative aspects will happen because that is the science of yoga?
Oh, that's a good question. I think faith is huge. I mean, it certainly comes up in the Yoga Sutras and various texts that you have to have a certain amount of faith. I don't think it's that internal, mental, emotional, intellectual approach. I don't think if you just get on your mat and do an athletic hour of yoga every day, that's going to guarantee you any kind of spiritual development. If there isn't some sort of deeper internal attitude and interest in becoming more aware of yourself and moving into those deeper layers and facing those different layers of yourself, no, I don't think, if we're talking poses, I don't think simply practicing the poses is a guarantee to getting where you think you're going to go.
But that to me is the faith of science. Science is saying it doesn't need your belief because it is. If we set up a machine and we switch on the switch, that it doesn't matter what your emotions, your thoughts, your belief, it doesn't matter.
Well, then you have to have a far more encompassing practice beyond just, the current modern situation of people getting on their mats and doing yoga as a form of a workout or to get their breath going. I think it has to be a much more full picture, complete practice for that science to produce the results.
Do you agree?
No, I don't agree. The scholar Chris Wallace and I go round and round. I have gone round and round this a little bit. Just to take another step back at context, part of the thing I love about the Hindu tradition is that because it gives us this model of being karmically entrained into incarnation, we're only incarnate because we have a karmic tie to this plane of existence, that inevitably the very structure of our growth leads us to moksha, it leads us to liberation. We will grow clear. Just like a tree is meant to grow and flower and give fruit, we are meant to move towards enlightenment. That's
even if it's not in this lifetime.
Even if it's not in this lifetime.
Okay, all right.
So it's given us technologies which will transform us. And there are bad yogis. There are, even the tradition is full of stories of bad yogis, angry yogis who use their powers
in a negative way.
Yes. And we even see it in the yoga community, because this does give us power, and we still have choice to utilize this power however we wish. But the larger faith of the tradition is that we're all evolving. You're going to have the karmic experiences you need, positive or negative. You're going to get yourself into a stink. You're going to get yourself into deep water, maybe through having more power, but that also will lead you to a higher state. And then the practices themselves, they are faithful. They are technology I think you can have faith in. Even if you're doing yoga at a shallow level,
there's going to be some growth, and there's going to be some positive outcome.
Yeah.
But he's asking, I assumed, this lifetime. Your question
what
was...
I'm hearing, Eric, you say.
Yeah.
And again, this is a foundation I hear through all practices. You don't have to do anything. Just by being, the evolutionary process is in place. Now, you can save time by choosing some technologies in your evolutionary process. However, by being, you, in fact, going to Christianity, and we already are enlightened. Living in the moment, no past, no future. We're perfect right now. So what I'm hearing you say is, in doing a yoga pose, even if I just do one sun salutation in my whole life, the technology of that physical pose and the physiology involved, there is a transformative element that occurs because that is the technology of that pose.
Yes, but can you see it or experience it in a bigger and broader sense that you are asking?
Now I think you're talking about consciousness.
Yeah.
So our life state is consciousness. Our challenges exist because of our lack of consciousness, I'd say. Again, coming from that place of we're perfect. God is. Nothing more is needed. And then potentially you could even open it up further. Like, I have chosen to say that what I'm going through in my yoga practice is hell, and it's a negative, and it's something I don't want. That's just my choice. I might be wrong. It might be dead on perfect. It might be pure enlightenment. When I'm in an argument with someone, maybe that isn't a negative. Like, that's, again, in a very broad sense, the horrors of the world might not be horrors in the way we've semantically defined them. If that makes sense.
There's a quote statement by Kafka. He says, "You can be the truth without knowing the truth." But I would riff off of what you're saying a little bit and say, we're designed to know the truth. And that's, we live in this occluded reality. We live in a reality that is not as full of the shining of the divine as the complete self-reflective consciousness, just by definition. It's this materiality, this density. And it definitely is a manifestation of the divine. But we as human beings have a game to play here. We have an unfolding which is implicit in the way we're designed. And to some degree I agree with what you're saying, that just by being I'm evolving. But
I don't know.
Let me modify that. As I sit here, if I get a notion that somebody around me is unhappy, and I have an opportunity to walk over to that person and put my hand on their shoulder and support them, and I just say, no, just by being, I'm fine.
It's a cop-out. It's a total cop-out.
You know, and what I'm saying is that life calls us to grow. It's constantly calling us to grow. And those choices to be more conscious and respond to those calls is what we're designed to do. And so if we have a philosophy that cuts out self-transformation, that is not aligned with our becoming. It's actively stalling our becoming. In fact, it's denying the very laws of nature which designed us. So as you say, we are the truth. I could sit here the rest of my life and just make tamasic decisions, you know, make decisions that would continue to occlude my consciousness. But at some point, they would become so painful, either in this lifetime or the next lifetime, that I would rebound into some more conscious choice. Because that's the way I'm designed.
I agree. I feel like there's an innate system moving us towards that higher power, that recognition of that deepest level of consciousness. I've seen plenty of people in my short life thus far that have chosen a very negative path. Yeah. I mean, very against the grain is what you're saying. Yeah. I firmly believe it takes effort. It takes effort, daily, consistent, conscious effort. And just getting on a yoga mat and doing a yoga workout doesn't necessarily, in your words, accelerate the path or the timing. I think it takes practice for most of us. There's probably some people on this planet that come in already further along karmically on their path, right? A lot of that work's already been done. But for most of us, they can coast. And they can maybe use those powers negatively, right? But for most of us, I think, and maybe this is partly my personality, but I think it requires work.
Yeah.
Like your wife said, chop the wood.
In a way, it's not even so much required. It's like, where's our joy? I mean, at some level it is required. Oh, I got to do this work. But once you cross, I call it the line of dread. Whenever we're confronted with some possibility of becoming, there's this sense of dread. And it's your ego going, oh my God, I don't want to die. Oh, I really like it here. It's really comfortable. You're going to get me up off this couch and make me jump into the ocean? But once you cross that line, there's an acceleration of joy in your life that you're designed for.
Well, and even the mundane, even the shit that you don't like can become kind of joyful.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I'm thinking of, you know, my teacher, Rod Stryker, and always quoting Swami Rama, and your job is figure out your dharma and learn to love it. You know, you have this encoding in you. Maybe there's resistance to it for whatever reason. Figure it out and embrace it and move with it.
Yeah. And then there's joy. I mean, it's like we're designed for that. It's not this grim, you know, Protestant work ethic thing where I'm going to be a good person by doing what I'm supposed to do every day.
You must suffer.
It's that choice of abhyasa, that choice of daily practice is joy. It's going to bring more joy into your life. You know,
the discipline of doing what we're meant to do.
Of opening to the flow every day, opening to the flow. Just like you eat every day, you breathe every day. Why wouldn't you as a higher being choose to open to the flow every day, consciously, with a practice?
I'm with him. I mean, that's the yoga for me. That's the yoga for me.
Yeah.
Really, is how can you be more joyful, more grounded, more skillful, and then more joyful? No matter, because you're going to face the shit. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter how much money you do or don't have. It doesn't matter who your parents were, what time you live in. Life is challenging, period. Life is challenging, and there are those ups and downs and things that don't go the way we want them to. So how do we go with that flow and be more joyful and trusting and skillful in how we navigate it? I think we have to wrap soon.
Yeah, I'm feeling that.
So, bottom line is, you can practice yoga and be religious.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it.
As a Christian/Hindu yogi, you say thumbs up.
Yeah, I do. I mean, there is that piece around one devotional path, and it is great if the path is sufficiently deep and, you know, has the gifts in it that you can pull out of it to stick with that one path. And you can definitely, you know, kind of customize it with other techniques.
Well, and you really should, right? Based upon the individual and your... You should. It should be a custom path. I'm not the same as he is, and I didn't come in with the same challenges. Same with you. So what I'm doing and what's working for me is
Yeah.
definitely not the same path or tools, or
Yeah.
combination thereof.
Yeah, it's working for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Am I becoming a better person, and am I more joyful?
Yeah, the upshot is make strong choices, make clear choices,
Choices.
make devotional choices, make skilled choices, listen to people,
Like
read
eyes
books.
wide open.
Yeah, keep your eyes open.
Eyes open. Because
What a
science
beautiful
can't
thing.
prove the energetics, but as we progress along our path, we can feel it, and we can see it, hopefully. Any last comments, Greg? You're laughing at me.
Semantics. Because I think Helen Keller really did a lot with not being able to see a thing.
She could feel it.
Apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think she's talking about, see internally.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
All
Oh, I
right.
think this is good.
So if you want to be in touch with Eric, Prasana.
PrasanaYoga.com,
Prasana.
PrasanaYoga.com.
Okay, Eric Shaw.
Eric Shaw, SHAW, ERIC.
He's traveling
not
a lot.
ERIK. And now I live in Australia. I do a lot of work in Asia. I'll be in.
Are you doing anything in the States or in the
I'm
Bay Area?
finishing up something, and I don't have anything planned to come. I'll come back. I'm sure I'll come back, but I don't have anything on my record as yet. So
All right.
nothing to advertise.
So go on the website. You've got
PrasanaYoga.com.
videos
yeah.
and stuff too
There's some
there.
videos there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Thanks, Greg.
All right.
Welcome.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Bye.